It's going to be another fantastic day. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, everybody, really for subscribing and liking. I know we don't say it often. We're
Yeah,
not pushing like and subscribe, but we need you to like and subscribe. And I just wanted to say we appreciate it. A lot of you are liking and subscribing. So exciting day today, Jay. We're going down the consciousness rabbit hole.
Absolutely. I know some people don't like it, but this is part of the phenomenon that we have to explore. So
I promise we will keep it UFO related. This is not just what is consciousness? No, specifically, what is it about the UAP phenomenon, contacts, downloaded messages, some people, picking up talents that they never once had before. A lot of very cool stuff happens, and it appears to be happening at the consciousness level. So this is still a UFO, UAP based show. But if we don't look at all the angles, we're never going to get to the answer. You can't chase orbs all day. It doesn't get you anywhere. So we have a couple of brilliant minds on here. We have a PhD and an Emmy award-winning documentary filmmaker. They're putting together a cool new film. We're going to learn about that. And we're going to make it all digestible and fun. I'm excited, Jay. This is right up my wheelhouse.
Well, yeah, me too. This is right up our alley. So
I now have you as a believer of the consciousness phenomenon. So
yeah,
a 1-over-1 guy. Now we just got to work on our thousands of viewers.
Yeah.
But anyways, enough fun. Let's get to work. We'll be back in a few minutes here. Actually, 26 seconds, because that's how long our intro music is.
Well, there you go.
We'll be back in exactly 26 seconds with today's guest, Dr. Robert Davis and Mr. Dave Beaty, right here on UAP Studies Podcast. Welcome back to another episode of UAP Studies Podcast. My name is Louis Borges. Joining me as always, my good buddy, Jason Gilmet.
Hey, we're rocking it this weekend, aren't we?
It's a busy weekend.
It's a busy weekend.
Ramped up. So of our recordings. This is 3 of 4 for the weekend, and we're very excited. It's a Consciousness Day, and we have 2 brilliant minds with us. We're going to try to keep it organized and ask everybody the right questions and not screw up anyone's name. So fingers crossed, here we go. So our first guest, Dr. Robert Davis. This gentleman has given lectures in 30 plus countries internationally. Some of his topics of focus are involving consciousness, the brain, parapsychology, and the unexplainable experiences people have been having and how this all relates, right? I know consciousness is a touchy subject, but it is very relevant, and we're trying to hit every angle we can to figure out what's actually going on. So big warm welcome to Dr. Robert Davis, and joining him is an Emmy award-winning documentary film producer, Mr. Dave Beaty. He is also a UFO researcher and has been kind of branching his work into that direction as well. So we have a brilliant filmmaker, a brilliant medical mind. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's have a little fun today. Let's get at go down a few rabbit holes and see if we can make it digestible and something that everybody can consume. So we'll start with Dr. Davis. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and similarly, as a doctor, what made you want to spend your efforts and attentions kind of on the UAP phenomenon?
Well, it was a PhD I received. I did mainly research in sensory neural research involving the brain, and that made me more than curious about consciousness, among other related factors. But I was always a closet ufologist, and I grew up in the 60s and 70s. It was hard not to be. So I was kind of like Richard Dreyfuss doing mashed potatoes of Devil's Tower in some way, but not sharing my interests with people. And yet I'd read MUFON magazines and Jacques Vallée, etc. In 2015, I saw 2 orange orbs of the night sky in Sedona, Arizona. That moved me and my wife. So I wrote the book, The UFO. Doesn't matter. It was an introductory book about basically ufology. I wanted to learn more. And from there, I became a member of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Research Foundation. And we did research on over 3,200 individuals who claimed to have interacted. This is what they reported. And this paper, written by myself and Dr. Russell Scalpone, was published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration in 2018. poorly recognized. It's not recognized in ufology, yet it should be. It's a highly respected, referred scientific journal, and it's ufology oriented. And the basic objective here, or conclusion, was that 75% of the 3,200 plus individuals say that their UAP, whatever you want to define it as, is non-physical. Is that consciousness? Whereas about 25% is physical. It's a small subsector population, but it's meaningful. Let's see more studies like that. Well, Kathleen Martin did a study. She led the MUFON Experiencer Research Team. She came up with similar conclusions with a population of 500. A few other studies are seeing similar things. What's that all about? I have no idea. The point is, the film that Dave and I are making, and Wilson Hawthorne is also a co-producer, it's about I guess you could capture it maybe in one way as the new frontiers of human experience and the enigmatic topic of consciousness. And I hate to even use the term consciousness because it's overused and nobody understands what it is. But it is a new frontier because it's an undeveloped field of study, like ufology. When I wrote that book back in 2015 or whatever, I never thought we'd be where we are now. Where a Harvard professor is talking about a Galileo project. And if you read his draft paper, which is publicized, you can get it in PDF format, he's talking about their objective, Galileo project. Let's look for extraterrestrial probes that are downloading, other smaller craft that are orbiting near Earth. That's their mission. If you told me in 2015 that was going to be an objective from Harvard University, one of the leading professors, regardless of everything else, which we are well aware of, with SETI and NASA involved in the DoD, etc., I wouldn't believe it. So it's all positive, controversial, but still positive. From there, move up really fast. I wrote a book, Life After Death, because I'm getting close to the end. I'm curious, and that got me into consciousness, quantum physics, and everything in between, ESP, etc. Last book, integration of what's it called? Unseen Forces, the integration of science, reality, and you. That kind of synthesized everything I learned by writing and researching everything I could on consciousness and UAPs and everything in between, ESP, the brain, etc. I sent it to Dave because I thought it should be a documentary. I didn't know who Dave was, the producer of the famous Nimitz Encounter film, 6 million plus downloads on YouTube. I didn't know that. So and he sends me a message. Sure, I'd love to read it, Bob. And keep in mind something Dave will say, something like unseen forces will come about, if we make a progress. And the title of the book is Unseen Forces, which he gets, and he is the producer of the Nimitz documentary. We hit it off right away, and the rest is history. And consciousnessfilm.info talks about the film and then some. So it's the foundation of the new frontiers of human experience, consciousness, the subjective essence of what people are experiencing, not only with NDE UAPs, but also NDEs and OBEs and you name it, Kundalini, extrasensory perception. This profound incident of reality, shall we call it, that leads to what's the acceptable term now is spiritual transformative experience, and STE is what's used. So maybe we should just call it STE, but UAPs are associated with that. People interact with it and its occupants as they claim. I'm not saying it never happened to me. What I think I saw, I don't know what I saw. Plasma, geothermal, Sedona, it's known for it. Or extraterrestrial, mothership, as Avi Loeb would claim, or interdimensional, as others claim, or AI, as others claim. I have no idea. I'm curious like hell. Dave is too. So the film is about everything. And,
nice.
From the science to the experiencer, the physical linking to the subjective.
Nice. And Dave, you've been a UFO researcher for quite some time, journalistic filmmaker. I'm curious about how the UFO phenomenon started for you, because usually to chase something and to do the amount of work that you've done, usually there's a conviction behind it that drives that force to pursue the answers to this phenomenon. So what What was it for you? Explain to us a little bit about yourself beforehand and how you got involved with ufology.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the beginning of my career was as a television broadcast journalist, and I spent about 10 years as a television reporter and photojournalist. During that time, I was always interested in the UFO topic and had read all the classic books and research, and really was very interested in the high strangeness cases. So eventually, when I moved to Florida in the early 1990s, I got involved with MUFON. I was a field investigator at that time. And my mother was living up in Gulf Breeze, Florida, which is very famous for a bunch of sightings in a flap that occurred there in the very early 90s. People might have heard of Ed Walters' controversial case, but there was many other significant sightings that went along with that. So I got to go up to that region where she was living and spent some time there. And I mean, it kind of snowballed. My interest kind of waned for a while. There wasn't a lot going on in ufology for a while, but when it started to come back, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and the New York Times kind of reinvigorated my interest, and I formed some groups, Facebook groups. Hundreds of people came in. We began discussing this very intriguing case of the United States Navy. In 2004, the New York Times, the ATIP program at the Department of Defense, and along comes Tom DeLonge with his organization that for some reason pulled together some of the highest U.S. government, personalities that were basically saying that this stuff is real and we need to pay attention to it. And, the U.S. government needs to take this seriously. So that was sort of my interest coming back. I ended up doing that film, starting off as just a 3D recreation of the events using 3D animation. And it kind of spun off into finding a bunch of witnesses that came forward and telling a story that was somewhat different from what you read in the New York Times and saw in some of the mainstream media accounts of just the FA-18 pilots with nobody else. And I found some guys that were involved in the ships on the surface that had these encounters, and they were strangely different in some ways, similar but different experiences. And so that got me back into it. And in the last couple of years, I've investigated several other U.S. Navy encounters, which are almost as strange and mysterious, but have really gotten way less coverage in the press and even in ufology. Bob reached out to me a couple of years back with this project. And, when you talk about consciousness and UFOs, sometimes those two things don't necessarily go together, and people wouldn't understand, well, what's the connection there? I've always had an interest in parapsychology and also various philosophies, revolving around near-death experience and out-of-body experience. I was introduced to a lot of literature as a young man, and, my parents were very interested in that material as well. So I was familiar with some of the concepts that surrounded ESP and, remote viewing and those things. Read a bunch of books on it. And I was kind of fascinated that Bob was bringing this topic together. And as we brought it to, discussed it and kind of hashed it out, we started saying, well, normally you don't talk about consciousness and examples of, what consciousness may actually represent with UAP, but there's a connection there. And we said there's a connection with these other areas of parapsychology that have been studied with academic rigor for many years, unlike, ufology and consciousness. And we thought that it might be a great opportunity to bring all these kind of disparate topics together into one film.
Right. And consciousness, it encompasses so many different aspects of things. It's not just UAPs, but near-death experiences or people have actually died still have the ability to think and to, they still feel like themselves, but outside their bodies. And that has always fascinated me because I always thought that the brain was where all the thoughts and capabilities of being able to think and reason all took place in the brain. But these people are saying, no, you can actually be out of your body and be completely brain dead and still be able to think and process things. We had Mindy Totfest on not that so long ago. She had a brain, was it an aneurysm or something like that?
Yeah, I think she had
blood vessel.
like an embolism. She described it as like hearing a shotgun blast and then not being able to function. So basically, she had as close to a death stroke as you can have and still survive. And I think even Leslie Kane, she's done, as much work in the UFO world, but also very interested in outer body experiences, near death, that type of thing. And I want to ask you guys, because you made a good point, Bob. The word consciousness has almost been beat to death, and it's almost worth throwing it away. Kind of like UFO. There's so much stigma attached to it. You can't go to the government and say, can you study UFOs? Because it's not going to go anywhere. But for those people that don't really have a grip on it, and I'm fascinated by it, and I still feel like I don't have a grip on it, what is consciousness? To the best of what we know today, is this a quantum field? Is this something manifested from the brain? Is this a force of nature like gravity? Like, what are you guys?
We're trying to figure out basically something that many thousands of scholars throughout eons of time have tried to address consciousness, and we still don't have an answer. And you ask me reasonably, what is consciousness? Who am I to give an answer? Let alone what is UAP and everything else that we're going to address. Let the person, and that's the intent of my books, here's the evidence, you make up your own mind, be objective as possible. And that's what the film's intent will attempt to be, where we have scientific minds, many are well noted internationally, as well as, in experiences, and try to integrate the two to try to make some sense out of just that. Is there a mind-brain distinction, a consciousness thing, and a brain thing? Meaning, there's a recent paper on quantum mechanics by Dean Ray, and I forget his co-author, and they propose that the brain mind is basically a quantum process where possibilities in life exist, and we, the mind, not the brain, but the mind, turns those possibilities into actualities. And they believe, they go through a process I can't begin to explain, let alone understand, that some aspects of mind are quantum, as some claim the UAP to be. I know Dr. Shields, he's on the same floor as Avi Loeb, and Dr. Shields, an astrophysicist, as opposed to an astronomer like Avi Loeb, behind the Galileo project, says that these UAPs are quantum amplifiers that use quadrupole radiation as their light source. And Avi Loeb tells me that, well, he didn't tell me in the paper. He says that these extraterrestrial objects, and besides Oumuamua, but there's another one that acted similarly, no trail, unusual acceleration around the sun, at the same heliocentric orbit, highly unusual. So he sees two of these orbits, and now he wants to open up the cameras, the sound, the light, the infrared to ultrasound. Let's look at things that are very tiny, besides the things that are very large. And let's see if we can see if ET, so to speak, is visiting Earth and using its sun to power its batteries and its water for fuel and its land. It's not a unique idea, but he's trying to make the connection, because why? I applaud him. He could be in left field, but I applaud him because we needed more academicians like him. 99% of them will be completely wrong, but all we needed is one white crow. And maybe it's a Gary Nolan, talking about his genetic and immunology work with what he does, the experiences of many phenomena, seeing if there's something brain-based to possibly explain the experience, or role, consciousness, and then some. So, and he has no answer, and he makes that quite clear. He's searching, as scientists should do, propose hypotheses. Sometimes they are far-fetched, but how are you going to get a better understanding of this complex reality and what people are reporting to us in varying ways? How do you make sense of their non-physical interactions with UAPs, which, simulated OBE? They float up into a matrix, they say. They leave their body. And there are a lot of similarities. You see, that's what piques my interest. Getting to your question directly, there are similarities among many of these spiritual transformative experiences, like NDEs and OBEs, etc., where people do sense I never did. Leaving their bodies, they enter a non-earthly-like environment. They interact with benevolent beings of varying types, often the grays, of course, but they can vary in shape and size and then some, so they say, from here, there, and everywhere in between. Messages aren't necessarily prophetic, but they're spiritual in nature. They tell them about life after death. They talk about their past. What they need to do, they learn from it, they adapt to it. In fact, what I found most intriguing about our study was that a subsector, 1,800 people in this subsector, of them, approximately 80.6% did not want their interactions to end, did not want their physical interactions with a non-human entity to end, that they believed to be real, even though it was absent and they're 9 to 5 in some office job, they still believe that alternate dimension, those beings I interact with are real. you know, we don't want to go there with the documentary. I know this is a UAP podcast, so I'm kind of emphasizing, that, but it relates to consciousness. It does. And the UAP is a smorgasbord of it all, because it has everything in it, from what I can tell, from my research. Besides, and on top of that, you got, deep secrets, the unacknowledged access programs, playing their tricks on people along the way. With falsified abductions, misinformation. You don't know who and what to believe. And the field is considered at best a pseudoscience because of it. And it should be a science. I truly believe that. And I've always advocated that it should be. And I'm taking great joy in seeing what I'm seeing in such a short period of time, because it is evolving into a science, a Syrian science, obviously, and Congress is behind it. I'm sure there are experiences among Congress people. Who of them are going to, none of them are going to admit it. I don't care about their party in any way I do, but they still, they're pumping the issue, as they should, and I think, as we all are well aware. And I hate to get overreactive about it, but I think it's wonderful. Something I never would have expected, having gone through Project Blue Book and the hearings at the UN back in 74, 5, etc., and beyond, where Hynek and Vallée were saying this phenomenon was so complex. It is both physical and non-physical. It is non-terrestrial. I forget the words exactly that Hynek expressed, but he was getting at the same points that we're seeing now. Same thing, only 40, 50 years later. It's like Kenneth Knuth at State University of New York at Albany. He says, with his techniques, he tracked an object with the tic-tac was 100,000 miles per hour. I forget the G-force, 1,500 G-forces, with his sensory instrumentation, which are trying to obviously upgrade, refine. Everybody's trying to do that now for obvious reasons, given the high level of interest. But Oberth, I forget his first name, back in the 50s, a physicist, said the same thing. 60 Mach. That's what Knuth said, 60 Mach velocity, 100,000 miles per hour. So we haven't advanced as much yet. We will. But it's a different time. It's a different suit, in a way. And it's the same times. We now have new technology to try to go beyond, since we have everybody on board just about. And we're going to make some nice advances in the next few years. I'm very anxious about it.
Nice. Even on a basic level, I take a lot of enjoyment out of seeing simple experiments. You mentioned Dean Radin. I think he works at the Center of Noetic Studies. I watched something maybe 10 years ago on just random number generators. So they have a random number generator, makes no difference if it's going to be a 1 or a 0. And they have people focus and say, try to make it produce more 1s or try to make it produce more 0s. And they don't know how it works. And it works almost all the time. But somehow or other, they can get just through thoughts. And, we're getting into the world of ESP and telekinesis, bending forks and all that stuff. But even on a very simple, basic experiment, we can show that this works. And then if you take it to another level on things like shooting photons through slits, I think we've all seen that test where when you don't observe it, it makes one pattern on the film. When you try to record it, it makes a totally different pattern. So the mere observing of something changes how it behaves and what it becomes. And it's almost like nothing is there until it has some intention. And that makes a lot of sense, even with the UAP. It's not for nothing. The people that have had these experiences usually say it was a positive thing. It was profound. There was a reason to it. And it's more connected now than ever. And it's more confusing now than ever. But I think by understanding all the various angles affecting UAP, we can get closer to it. I don't think you get anywhere chasing orbs, right? We need to look at it with brains such as yourselves and all the other people that you mentioned. But the proof positive to me is that simple experiments do show there's something to this. And you don't have to be an astronomer or an astrophysicist. They'll probably be the ones to figure it out. But the average person can still grasp it. And we still know that we're sentient, right? It's that sort of self-awareness. So what are your thoughts on consciousness, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Bob makes some great points there. And when I first started researching this topic with Bob, I had to do a deep dive, as we talked down the rabbit hole to try to look into, what is consciousness? And I think materialist science in med schools, they teach that consciousness arises from an electrical chemical process that's going on in our brain. That's how they look at it. If the brain stops functioning, there's no more consciousness, there's no more thoughts, that's it. I've always thought that, that probably isn't actually correct. And when I started looking into the current, philosophy on, some of the academics that are studying this, they also believe that maybe that's not the best approach to look at it, that it could be, upside down, that instead of the brain creating consciousness, maybe consciousness exists in some other type of multidimensional field, and that the brain is actually created and awareness is created, 3D physical reality is created as a processee of consciousness. And that's why some of the experiments you talked about are so intriguing. We were talking to a researcher up at Monroe that's doing, basic psi research on ESP and telekinesis, psychokinesis. He was coming out of the University of Virginia as a PhD, and he's doing these studies looking at non-locality of people being able to influence other physical systems non-locally. And it seemed to be something there. I mean, that's what you find when you look at Dean Radin's work, when you look at Stanford Research Institute and the Princeton Pear Laboratory that was doing similar research into parapsychology and ESP, and as you mentioned, influencing random number generators. There's something there. And science kind of has ignored it. Basically, you run thousands of these double-blind protocol tests, and you find out, hey, this is not random. Some people seem to have an ability to skew that statistic. Not much, but it's enough to be like, whoa, that's, something's going on there. So that's one, clue that says, hey, maybe consciousness is not an electrochemical processy. The near-death experience is another thing you mentioned, and that's where somebody could be declared clinically dead. They're in the ICU and their heart goes into cardiac arrest, so their heart stops, all EEG brainwaves cease. Yet these people sometimes report these very, very detailed narratives of what they experienced during that time, oftentimes even observing the clinical medical staff in the room from a position above the bed. You sometimes hear that they would be able to see things going on that even jokes say that the surgeon makes, that they weren't there. They should not have been able to experience that with that great fidelity, but yet they do. It's subjective evidence, but I think that there's a lot that kind of look at this idea that consciousness may be a primary force or a fundamental force in the universe.
Nice. So like a different dimension. Almost like a dimension we're not acknowledging or have no knowledge of.
That's where it could be. Good question, Jason. These gentlemen, if I may, I think they are really getting at what I think if I can go out on a limb and say anything conclusive at all, is that the mind, there is a mind-brain distinction, and I think we're touching upon it. We really are. What both of you are saying, I think, is right on. The mind simply plays an active role in our physical world, but we ignore that. And there is a ton of evidence. There is, but you got to dig into it. You got to read these boring studies. Who has the time? And you got to look at it and the statistics behind it, because the evidence is statistical, largely easy to ignore. You have to come from a little scientific background, not necessarily, to really get into it. You got to go in with the intention to understand that this evidence, it's overwhelming, as you mentioned, and it does support these possibilities, and it strengthens that relationship. The relationship being that there is indeed a mind-brain relationship. Two things that you're each addressing, manifested in different ways, very subtly, but real. And it may be partially quantum. See, it links to science. So we see mind, brain, quantum effects. We don't understand it, but we see it. And I can give you the details of these experiments, the telekinesis between twins, random number generators. You know, you do 50%, give you 1,000 trials, heads or tail, 50% is what you're going to give me, right? Well, you know what? If you give me 54% or 56% positive heads, you got your hit, versus 50% by the norm. That's significant enough to the 1/1,000,000th, degree. You understand?
Yeah.
There's subtle effects that statistically that show some people have this ability and may be able to give you 80% correct. You have these outliers, and you see them with mediums too, under very well controlled conditions through Winbridge Institute, through published papers, and IONS, and that's the noetic scientists, as you mentioned prior. Overwhelming evidence under very strict controls that they can communicate with another source, an aspect of consciousness, retrieving information external to their body, I believe is also an aspect of consciousness. And people within the world of ufology, whatever that is, get that sense. This is what many report. I'm not talking about thousands. I think we're talking about millions of people. I know many personally who say they have an interaction on a subjective level, whether it's my labs or a combination thereof. I don't know, but this is what they contend with every fiber and serious determination within their soul. What happened to me? Why am I interacting with this? Why am I being pulled through the wall by a being? Why am I going to a craft and given a hybrid? Why am I being involved in a non-physical thing? But if I may go back to the article, why do those that interact with it say over 10 times we found? We subgrouped it 1 to 3, 3 to 5 interactions, whatever that meant to them. Those having adopted, as you would expect, we're very adaptive creatures, to the interaction, mainly positive, but some was negative, but they felt eventually some relationship. I mean, is it a hostage kind of relationship? I don't know. Where they accept their their partner. They didn't want it to end, as I had mentioned. What is that about? And they take that with them to life. They become what? Less materialistic, less religious, more spiritual.
Yeah.
That changed in many dynamic life domain ways. Personal philosophical strategies and belief systems are altered as a result. It can come in the form of UAP, associated with or without a non-human intelligent entity, which comes, as we know, in varying forms, or as you mentioned, NDE, OBE, Kundalini, then some. We can have clairvoyance with people, synchronicities. I've had some that knock my socks off. That alone, I think we've all had them and largely ignored. But it's part of showing us the complexity, I think. And I could be wrong. Please interpret whatever I say, with hesitation, not too literally, and in context with others. But I think it shows us that the mind does play that active role in the physical world, and the distinction between the two, and their interplay. And yet we don't know how to relate it somehow. We know there's something there, Many people experience that separation in varying ways. So OBEs or NDEs, I don't know. We lack the language to explain it because we don't even have definitions for what we're talking about, really. And that is seriously lacking. We need academicians from all disciplines looking at many of these phenomena, trying to make sense of it all, and integrating and synthesizing it into a coherent whole, if at all possible. If at all
Nice.
possible. Let's start. I think there's something there and worthy of exploration. That's why the film is, looking at this new frontier,
Nice.
an underserved area of study.
And Dave,
An unrecognized area of study, I should say.
And Dave, I was going to ask you, so you've investigated, the incidences that have happened with the military. You've talked to these people. You did a wonderful Nimitz documentary on YouTube. I think it's still available there, right? With you were mentioning over 6 million views or something. Like, it's just crazy the amount of people that have seen this. There seems to be a consciousness to these crafts. At least the people that we've talked to have mentioned this. With your investigation, your research, have you found this to be the case as well, that seems to be whatever occupants is inside the craft, if there is any, but there seems to be like an overall consciousness, like the craft reacted to Fravor when he came down. They started swirling. It's as if it recognized that he was there, a consciousness of sorts. It was very fast, very reactionary. And the way that these things fly is almost as fast as the speed of thought. What have you found throughout your research in this regard? Like, have you noticed this to be a pattern?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, especially in the military cases, what I found that some of these guys are very nuts and bolts in their approach to their experience. And they say one witness may have been on the same ship and saw one of these objects and had kind of no reaction to it, whereas somebody else in the same position would have a profound life-altering reaction. In the case of the Nimitz event on the USS Princeton, the radar ship that was nearby, some of the men that were reporting seeing these objects, for instance, from up high up on the bridge wing of the ship using the big binocular systems, they would look out at a direction based on the radar returns of where these objects were, because they were seeing them for like a week before.
Right.
And, one gentleman might observe a very unusual behavior of these objects. And then Kevin Day, who was a senior chief operations specialist on the ship, when he observed these objects, he told me that he immediately had this profound connection. And the term a lot of people are using in ufology is a download, and that would be where they receive information rapidly that's a sort of an understanding of maybe the physics or what this stuff is. And I know that Kevin had a profound reaction to it that changed his life, really. I mean, at that moment in time, there were some other cases and individuals that I talked to that also had these profound life-altering experiences, perhaps not always at the exact moment of the UFO, like as a starting point, but maybe they've had some other experiences, but they were in the Navy. And then one gentleman that was on the East Coast around the time of the gimbal UFO footage and the go fast UFO footage, he was on the aircraft carrier USS Roosevelt at the time. And that's the aircraft carrier that the fighter jets flew off of to film these UFOs. And this gentleman had a profound life-altering experience soon thereafter. He almost calls it being initiated. And his philosophy is that these things are, in essence, here to transcend humanity, or for those that come into close proximity to them, they're going to be transformed in some way, our consciousness elevated, our lives changed to a higher, frequency or something like that. His name is Robert Matthews, and you can find his book called Initiated on Amazon if you want to read his story as a Navy guy. And I spoke to him way before he was out of the Navy and even wrote that book. So yeah, there are, even in just the few cases that I've studied, you come across these individuals that have had these spiritually transformative experiences after coming into close contact with UAP.
Yeah.
I think the biggest smoking gun is anybody who's reported getting information through a contact. It's always been telepathic. They don't speak our language. Their mouths aren't moving. So for those who are really resisting the UFO consciousness connection, just look at anyone's report. Anyone that has received a message or has felt good or felt bad, it's all been as a result of the data that has been exchanged. And we chatted with Kevin Day yesterday, and he has some kind of like prodigy mind when it comes to mining right now. He's like, I don't know how a Navy guy got into geology and all this stuff, but he's like, I just have all this information I didn't know anything about. We chatted with Michael Allens from England. The guy basically got a download and knows how gravity propulsion ships work, wrote a book on how to build a flying saucer. So, it's like becoming a savant after bumping your head. And now you can speak 15 languages and play the piano better than anyone else, right? Something happens. It is nonverbal. And so I think for me anyway, that is the biggest proof that this is at a consciousness level, just by the mere way they communicate.
It's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, and, the other thing that I learned working with Bob Davis and doing some research with some of the academics that have signed on is that, when you think about memory and what we learn in our brain, what they're finding out that it doesn't seem like memory is stored in the brain. It doesn't seem to be there. So in where is memory then? Is that another in a multidimensional field somewhere that we can access? And is that how that works, where we can become suddenly a savant prodigy in some topic and speak languages that we never learned and so on? Very interesting.
Yeah, and meditating too, right? You're looking for external influence, and then you get enlightenment or inspired somehow, and visual and just packets of data. And like you said, it's not stored in the brain, so it has to be coming from somewhere.
It's strange. You're hitting on something that's so enigmatic. I had a close friend. He's driving, and next minute he says he's up in a ship, and he goes into detail about what happened. And ever since that moment, he's flipped, like many others. They keep their career maybe, or they go into something more serving of humanity, more ecological, which is not unusual at all. Or they'll keep their job, but maybe create an organization or do something to promote their newfound spirituality or whatever, newfound truth as they express it. Yeah. But their encounter was generally initiated by the entity. To him, he had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
He sees a ball of energy in his bedroom. He's as logical as it can be. He's an IRS attorney, has a high-level job in Miami. If you're illogical, if you have psychosis, you can't function in your daily activity and carry on a kind of job like that and be in a courtroom like he is.
Right.
I've known him for 5 years. Believe me, a little quirky like I am and everybody else, but we got our thing. And believe me, he's not psychotic. So what's that all about? I learned more from that than anything I've read. And that anecdotal experience from the crazies to the non-crazies, most of the non-crazy. What's that all about?
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing with the more that we're studying this phenomenon is that we're realizing that these people are rational people, from all walks of life. So like we talk to people inside the Defense Department that are having experiences the same as the general population. This is even people in Hollywood are starting to come out now and saying that they're seeing things or have had some sort of interaction of some sort. This doesn't discriminate. It doesn't seem to be sticking to any race or creed. It's a global problem, and everybody across the world is saying there's some message being relayed that we need to elevate our consciousness. And like I said before we started the podcast, I poo-pooed the whole idea when I first started, saying this is some sort of, spiritual.
I broke you down, man. I wore you down.
Yeah, wore me down. And the more that we're looking at it, the more that the subject of consciousness is integrated in UAPs experiences. And Dave, you were mentioning something that I really like is you're saying that people are seeing different things. They could be at the same event, but they'll both get two different experiences or two different sightings. Sometimes that happens as well.
It's incredible. Yeah. I mean, talking about Kevin, I mean, in my opinions and, beliefs, when I did the film in 2018, I didn't include his ability to manifest events and things, that he was claiming that he gained these abilities after the download and the paired photons and physics involved. I just kind of like said, well, that's kind of not what my film's about, so I'm going to just not include that. It was, I don't know. I mean, I tried to like give every witness like tell exactly their story, but he was the one witness that had this whole other experience that the other guys didn't have on the ship, that at least the ones I talked to. Another guy that's truly interesting is Carl Olashak, who was on the USS Reagan in the same year, 2004. He saw this UFO hovering over the ship for hours and according to him, his watch, this thing was there. Whereas another witness that was just outside the bridge, one of the lookouts, saw it for what he says was like 30 seconds or something like that.
Right.
This complete diversity of like 3 hours, 30 seconds, and you were both in the same place at the same time. And I don't know if that has something to do with the manipulation of consciousness or our awareness and the way that maybe even quantum physics and space-time exist. I know that it is true that they say that, it's a kind of an illusion that we experience time the way that we do. And maybe there is some technology out there that's able to manipulate that in a way that like changes people's perceptions.
Nice. And because we delved in this a bit and I've had time to think about it and we brought it up a few times, but is consciousness universal in a way that, is it something that's like a universal power, the same way as weak and strong, nuclear powers and electromagnetic fields and all that? Like, is consciousness a natural progression of the universe and on a universal scale that all civilization come to? Is it a possibility?
Maybe one way to answer that quickly, the only line of evidence I think that we might have that might partially address your question is that the Princeton Engineering Anomalous Research Lab once did an extended study, and they sent, and Dave alluded to it earlier, they sent these random number generators, I forget how many, in different locations around the world, and recorded activity at certain frequency and charted activity. It was all sent down to a server, down at Princeton University and analyzed. So it was a filtering process, and when there were major catastrophic events that brought the attention of billions of minds to one place, like downtown Manhattan on 9/11, we get major standard deviations beyond 2. In other words, things go non-random.
Okay.
Where things should be, varying around 50%, like heads, tails, black, white, yes, no, random. But is there a collective consciousness? It's the only evidence we have. You have your controversies. You have some people saying it's a fluke or whatever. I think there's something there. And certainly the researchers believe that it is an aspect of ESP on a cosmic scale, so to speak. Getting back to your point earlier, we have Diane Hennessy Powell in our film, a noted neuropsychiatrist, wrote the book, The ESP Enigma, has 2 autistic savants, one of which I get the ages confused, but one is 4 years old, can speak 6 different languages, never exposed to either. She researched it, controlled it, all that. So, what's that all about? Bob, it must be Tom Campbell's theory, the physicist who's in our film, believes in the simulation hypothesis. We're getting, that someone's in control. I can't explain it. The brain can't be doing this kind of behavior. How do you explain something like that? Or, these children also have past life memories, go back and they find it's fairly accurate. You never know. Not you can't say it's literally true. There's always external influences potentially that can't be controlled for. But the point is, the encounter is usually initiated by the entity. We have no say in the matter violates our right. The communication is indeed, we all hear, it's telepathic in nature, and it's primarily extrasensory. It's visual, but it's considered more than everyday experience. It's a profound incident of reality. It comes in all different shapes and sizes. Some people see it, some people don't, as Dave was relating to by the sea personnel on board to the same research. We see this in different contexts. What's that all about? Like your expectations, or some people are selected to see it. Who knows? Who knows how it works, if it works? But the predominant emotions that are interchanged, or that we humans come away with when we have this exchange, is there's love, there's friendship, and there's kindness. We come away largely. I'm not to say that there are some negative entities and interactions and reports. That constitutes 10-20%. So say preliminary, very preliminary raw data. Again, we're scratching the surface. We have to add more of the academicians. I can't emphasize that enough. That's my mantra for the day. But nevertheless, we see consistency, is what I'm getting at, among many of these phenomena, which includes UAP. And we can't exclude NDE, OBE, etc. But we also see obvious dissimilarities as well. We have to recognize this for what it is. But there is some aspect of consciousness that, yeah, you can make the case that is altered, given each one a trigger. Each one serves as a trigger, an ontological shock. Rick Strassman, who studied psychedelics at whatever university back in the 90s, he met with John Mack, who developed a center. Harvard professor, believed in the alien abduction phenomenon. They met once, and they were, in their words, blown away by the similarities of the research subjects, their experiences between those that were affected by, I think it was, I forget now, psilocybin he used, and UAP experiences. Remarkable similarities and unique differences. But what's that all about? They come away believing it happened. You know, like I went to the ball game Tuesday.
Right.
It happened. And
it both do affect the or the people either doing the drugs or having these experiences. They're profoundly affected by them either way.
Yeah, but more, yeah, and more to their psyche. It's an ontological shock. It creates what that's speculated by some, an ego dissolution. It goes real far, enough so that they're using psychedelics in trauma centers to treat PTSD, in psychiatric clinics to treat severe depression. Ketamine, that is being selected as a drug of choice. I suspect others will have more application in the psychiatric community as we do more research going forward. But, you know, what does that say? You know, should we all be taking psychedelics? Microdosing, as many people claim to do on Wall Street. They should be having a good time now, you know, going down with with everything else. But nevertheless, you know, we're trying to tie together, make sense, make an integrative whole out of a lot of nonsense. Make sense of nonsense, and we're doing our best. And I give you gentlemen credit for doing that. You have the right guests to bring on to try to achieve that objective. That's frustrating. We call it rabbit hole, and it is a never-ending search indeed, and we have to learn to accept that until there may be one day a new discovery, revelation. You may come out of left field that is so revealing and heavy-handed. It could be on the 6 o'clock news. That gives us an answer. I doubt it. I doubt it. You know, I doubt the White House lawn scene, you know, Independence Day. You know, I don't think so. Not in my lifetime. I bet more on China and Russia than that, unfortunately.
I want to ask you guys, what are your thoughts on entanglement? A lot of these consciousness experiments that they've done over the years, they take a particle, they put one there, you affect one, the other is immediately affected. So the whole idea of entanglement from the Big Bang, we're all connected. Maybe us and ET have that same connection that we all have right now as human beings on this planet. So what are your thoughts on the whole entanglement? We really are one.
We don't, you know, we call dark matter and dark energy comprises the majority of the universe. We call it dark energy and dark matter for one thing. We don't know one thing about it.
That's right. We don't understand.
It's dark. You know, is it a collective of connections? As you ascribe, that we're getting at, who knows what it is. entanglement? Is there biophotonic interrelationships, carried by geomagnetic force from one place to another instantaneously? One electron split in half, light years apart. You manipulate one, the other, manipulates in the opposite way instantaneously, and all that. What implication? It's proven. What implications does that have, though, if any, on humanity? Is that subserve? In other words, ESP, telekinesis, a change in alpha waves in this one person might close his eyes. A twin in another Faraday cage also shows alpha wave, but didn't close the eyes. A transference of appropriate energy despite distance that should not, according to EEG experts, happen by 10 million to 1 in chance kind of thing. We see experiments like that of telekinesis in varying ways. Dave and I will try to capture some activity, in this direction, showing ESP, or what science at this time in 2023 is doing to try to influence, show, demonstrate, what's going on in the world of science about this that we're addressing in some way. We're going to have Nolan in the film. We're going to see the Nolan lab, who contribute in a unique way. We'll address simulation hypothesis, possibly in some way. ESP, out of body, near death. We have Joe McMonagle, the psychic spy. We have already interviewed him, and Eben Alexander, neurosurgeon, gave up neurosurgery because he had NDE. And now he's talking NDEs and meditation and hemisync. You talk about being flipped. You come in contact with many flipped people. That profound incident of reality in the form of a UAP, up front and close, up front and personal. If it happened to me, as opposed to being in the distance, I'm told on the phone, Reverend Michael Carter, more sane than I am, a friend, he convinced me that the UAPs are real. Next comment by Mike: Bob, UAP touched me. What's that? Was that Mike? Bob, a UAP touched me. And he went on to explain. Now, this guy makes more credible sense, has a highly respected, credible job. We all know. What's that all about? We hear these stories constantly. I'm a crazy scientist. Dave's a crazy professional in his area. I say crazy with love, but you have to have a few people that think outside the box.
Sure.
Yeah.
In different professions. You dudes too.
Yeah.
The white crow, like you said, right?
You get it. You bring on people that get it. And you're trying to facilitate a movement to shift that paradigm. You do your thing, Dave and I'll do our thing.
Yeah.
This dude will do his or her own thing.
Yeah.
We can't do the same thing, of course, and that's cool. But we contribute to a unifying whole. And it'll be realized who knows when. But we'll make an effort. You'll be here longer than I assume you're in your whatever, doesn't matter. But nevertheless, you'll see more of a progress. And it's a bright future. I'm hoping for a bright future. Where it leads, no one knows. It's a yellow brick road. But I'm startled by what I've seen in the last 10 years, less than that.
Nice. And Dave, I know it's difficult when you're a filmmaker, especially when you're recording so much material with so many, high end people of very reputable reputations and stuff like that. Hemingway said you have to kill your darlings when it comes down to editing. And I just wonder, like, the complexity of being a filmmaker, like, it's when you're going through this sort of documentary process, are you constantly thinking, oh, this has got to be in a documentary? And then, like, you got to make room for so much material in such a short time. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. And, as we have the list of the people that we want to include, that, we have to have this person, we also have to balance, reality with that, especially the budget of our film. For the most part, as your program, it's a passion project for me and Bob. We're doing this outside our 9 to 5, and we're trying to raise funds so we can travel with our filmmaking equipment to these locations. And one of the things that I said from the beginning is I really want to use professional equipment so that we're, with the people that we're filming, versus what we've done for the last 3 years is just do a Zoom. I mean, we could really do that, but I wanted to make a little higher end movie that we were able to bring in some equipment and make it look good, so that's a challenge. So you have to say, okay, if this person's over here, who can we also get that's in the same location? So we're making those types of organizational decisions. And if somebody's a way outlier, we have to weigh and say, do we really need that person or not? And then the same thing goes when you're talking about interviewing somebody for 3 hours, and the content and the discussion that takes place in those times, a lot of that's going to end up on the cutting room floor, and it's sad, but you have to kind of just, boil it down to the key items. And what we've been trying to do, if you do, we'll give you the website at the end, but if you look at that, you'll see some of the key subject areas. So we're trying to bring the interview topics to these areas and specific to experts in these areas, and then present that to the audience with a broad overview as well. So yeah, I mean, that's probably the worst part, is cutting out stuff that you really want to use, and you can't have a 4-hour documentary. So
yeah. And when do we have an expected date for this documentary?
Well, it's an
release
ongoing
date?
process. Yeah, I mean, I told Bob when we first started that if we really want to make this film, that doors will open for us. We should be prepared for that, even though, we don't have, say, an overriding sponsor that's paying for the film, and we're just shoestringing it, basically. That I said, if we really have pure intentions and we want to get this message out, and in some ways provide hope. I mean, in some ways, that's what I'm hoping to do, is to provide hope to people that maybe that we're more than our physical bodies, that when we die or when our loved ones die, there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that we go on, our consciousness don't just evaporate at that point. So that, to me, is like a very powerful motivation in this film. And I'm hoping that, we'll continue to be successful in getting out there and getting more interviews, and basically closing the gaps so that we can have this done sooner rather than later. But when you don't have, a full sponsored film to make, you kind of have to do it as you get money. And so I can't tell you exactly when we're going to release it, but hopefully sooner rather than later.
Gotcha.
And you guys have a title for this movie? Is it The Consciousness Connection?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the website as well. We call, the actual website is consciousnessfilm.info. So.
Okay. Well, when you guys are have it ready to go, let us know. We'll be glad to share it with our viewers. And it's been interesting chatting as well. Where else can guys follow you, both Bob and Dave, if people want to learn more about what you're working on?
But that website is up and running. It's going to be updated soon with some more guests that we plan to interview, like Bruce Grayson, Jeff Long, among others, Ryan Center. BobDavisSpeaks.com. My website is bobdavisspeaks.com, and the website again is consciousnessfilm.info. If anyone wants to provide some support for travel funds, primarily, that's it, for our sweat equity, that'd be great if they can do so. Dave, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. So the website has links where you can sign up if you want to receive information from us via email. There's a GoFundMe page where we're trying to raise money just to cover travel expenses to go out and do these interviews. So far, we've actually gone out to Monroe Institute last summer and spent a week out there, basically covering that entire story, which is a fascinating location that has this history of research into higher consciousness. So you'll want to see that material as well that we're doing. You can see my film, the first film I did on UAPs on YouTube. That location is at the Nimitz Encounters on YouTube. So if you just search for the Nimitz Encounters, the same thing with the website, thenimitzEncounters.com, you can find information there. You can follow me on Twitter at Dave_Beaty, Beaty, or you can look up some of the articles and research I've done on UAPs on medium.com, again, with my name. So
nice. And I want to thank both of you as well for coming on today. And I appreciate what you guys are contributing to this subject. And unfortunately, there's no money to be made in ufology. And like Bob says, whatever that means, everybody's doing this out of the passion for the subject. And we're all putting money into trying to get the word out there, or trying to raise the awareness of the situation. And I can't, like I said before we started, I can't think of two better gentlemen to come on and talk to us about consciousness, how it applies to UAP. And I know it applies to so many other factors and different variations in life. But we focus on UAPs and we try to see what the connection is there. Thank you so much for both of you for coming on the podcast today. Let's have you guys both on again. Maybe when the movie comes out and we got a little bit more data, let's have you guys back on.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for all you contribute for our important cause. And it's one thing we have in common. We know that our cause is real, and it's very important to pursue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what the answer is unknown. But and that we have to deal with in our own personality way.
Perfect. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.